Hello, my name is Maxim,
And my name is Vitaly.
and we are both Russian Byzantine Catholics. And we started this channel to to discuss some topics concerning Russian religious life, and especially the life of the Catholic Church in Russia, and probably some ideas about Russia and its state, like its moral
Yeah, so
state,
we're gonna touch on some political issues, maybe discuss some theology also, if need may be. Today we were gonna do a little segment. We're just gonna introduce ourselves, probably a little bit, and then we decided to discuss this issue of, as Max already said, some preconceived notions that people have of Russia, how we live, I guess both positive and negative. Today maybe will be a little more about the negative stuff, but also I get hopefully about some positive stuff. So yes, I guess we'll start by telling just a small bit about each other. We're probably going to record a separate segment on how we became Catholic, so now we're just going to do it in a few words. So how about you start?
Yeah, okay, my name is Maxim. I'm coming from Siberia, though I was born in the northern parts of Kazakhstan. But that's like a pretty average story of a guy like me, 25 years old, coming from post-Soviet
Sphere.
Sphere. Yeah. So how can you put it? Actually, I was raised in a small town, which, if you imagine Russia as a bear in jump, it will be like in a soft underbelly of this monstrous bear, practically in the center of Eurasia, of the whole continent. And I'm a Catholic. I was raised though I was raised in a very practicing Orthodox family. I studied, so I was preparing to enroll into Orthodox seminary, but finally, after long consideration and trials, I realized that the Catholic Church is one true church, to which and with which each Christian body must be reunited. And now I'm a second-year master student in St. Petersburg State University, English philology, though my English may fail me due to several reasons today. And the first would be vanity. And
yeah, so I have a kind of long biography, but just so as I said, today we'll keep it short. So I was born in St. Petersburg. I lived for a while, as you can guess by the way I speak, in Canada. That's where I started, my, I guess, ecclesiastical life. I was in OCA, Orthodox Church of America, briefly. Then I switched parishes. I was in ROCOR, Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. After living there for 8 or so years, I decided to come back to Russia. I had, you could say, a short spiritual crisis. And during that crisis, I decided to read up on church history, which I knew, but I never considered it, as probably the case with you, the Catholic Church. And I just thought I have nothing to lose. So basically I started reading some literature on church history, on the Great Schism. And as you said, after some consideration, I decided to become Catholic. And I joined the church in 2013 or 14. And you, when was it?
It was the 14, yeah.
Yeah, so around the same time. Actually, several of my friends, separately, we didn't know each other, and several of my friends also converted, also kind of, not exactly separately, but not because we influenced each other, so to say. So I've been Catholic for not too long, but I would say I believe with all my heart that Catholic Church, as you said, one true church. because we are Catholics in Russia, there's not that many of us here, and especially Byzantine Catholics.
It's not an easy task to be Byzantine Catholics in Russia, because so the general attitude of the culture, which is so very embodied in this, well, idea of orthodoxy, Russian orthodoxy, which is rather, about culture, not about the religion itself, but probably we'll discuss it further.
It might be true of Catholic countries also, but it's, I guess, just the issue of the fact that we are Catholics in a, in an Orthodox setting. So of course it's gonna influence much, and that's why I think we have an interesting perspective, especially lately with the whole issue of Ukraine, gaining their autocephaly. Catholics and uniats, or Byzantine Catholics, are again viewed as something, let's say, not good. So that's why we wanted to discuss, because it's been going around recently, just the way our country reacts to the issue, and I guess that's why we wanted to discuss also how people view it from the outside, especially I would say for Orthodox converts in the West. They often have this view of Russia as, like a great Orthodox country.
Empire, the new Byzantine Empire, the Third Rome, or so, yeah.
Yeah, like the defender of faith. So Maxim is going to talk about just some realities, I would say.
Yeah, the fact is that, the Iron Curtain ceased to exist quite a time ago. Yeah, but it still kind of remains an issue that those people, conservative and liberal people, so of any party living and discussing stuff in the Western countries, perceiving Russia as something completely separate, and probably not so many people know what kind of discussion is going on here, the kind of talks we are talking, and actually participating in essay exchange programs, in that university here in St. Petersburg, I realized that lots of American students from Texas, for example, I don't know why, really don't get it right, and usually perceive Russia as something, when depending on their political stance, as something ugly, and an ugly monolith of conservatism and stubbornness and bigotry and whatsoever, or like an El Dorado of happiness, conservatism, spiritual values, religion, and
I would say even they have the same kind of source of information, and just some people interpret it in a positive manner, and I guess liberals and left-wing kind of intellectuals perceive it obviously as bad. But the reality is I would say it's a little more complex.
Just a little spoiler, we kind of live in the same Western civilization, and probably dealing with the same issues, though a little bit differently. So living in Canada, what was it, like the most outstanding myth you came across with?
Well, again, it's the same type of information, it's just different people, interpret it differently. I remember there was a case, like, it's not a religious thing, but it's like political thing. When war with Ossetia started, I worked in a candy shop or whatever, grocery store, and this lady came up to me and she asked me, why is your president so aggressive, and why is he so, I don't know, he wants to conquer other people's countries, that kind of thing.
A good person to ask.
Right, so that was, for example, that was interpreted as a bad thing, but some conservatives, I had Serbian friends, for example, who really were into the whole imperial, imperial spirit discourse, and they thought it was a great thing, right, that Russia, I hear it on Russia Today a lot, that, and we talk about it on our news a lot, that there's like a balance of power, right? So there's like the America that wants to conquer half of the world, and then Russia wants to conquer the other half of the world, and because Russia kind of gives a balance to it, we can live in a more, I don't know what I would call it, but you know, just a more balanced world, I guess.
Yeah, moral doctrine never dies.
Yeah, and of course, as Maxim already mentioned, you know, a lot of people think we have like just reigning homophobia here, or you know, like I don't know, racism, or you know, what have you, whatever you can think of. And the truth is, we live right now in St. Petersburg, although Maxim is, he said, from Siberia, so I'm sure it's a different thing there. But we see stuff like, you know, LGBT ideology, liberal ideology all around us, even though supposedly we live in a you know, very conservative country. And then some Canadians and Americans I talk to, they have the opposite view, as I said, interpreting all those things as a good thing. And so they see, especially like, again, my Eastern European friends, who though grew up in Canada and lived their whole life, so they're Canadians essentially. So they thought that Russia is kind of the last country, the last Christian country, where all the Christian values are defended, that basically liberals don't have any say. The culture here is predominantly religious. That, you know, our great president doesn't allow, you know, gays to, let's say, have parades, or he...
or any gay agenda just coming to universities and to public discussion.
Yeah, or that church has a big role, although it does, but Maxim will discuss that, you know, how exactly that happens. But they think that Orthodox Church influences a lot in a good way how our country is run, that even our politics are kind of based on some religious thinking or religious values. So I think, you know, and Maxim I think agrees that it's kind of not exactly the case.
It's oversimplified, and
yes.
Actually the most, like, to have something to start with, the most outstanding myth about Russia I heard from my German friends was about, so you have such good families, that family culture that never ceased to exist, that endured the Soviet Union, that was in a way strengthened by Soviet ideology. I don't know what they mean by that. So you have it so good and protected both by the government and by the church, which seems to have great influence in this country. Well, there is some statistics data. Well, if we take, for example, 2016, yeah, the percentage of, so if we compare the number of divorces to the number of actual marriages conducted and registered by the government, it was 60%. Actually, 6 out of 10 marriages, families, split up. And that's probably telling something.
And also it's ironic that during the Soviet times, for whatever reason, so it's not religious reasons obviously, actually the divorce rate was lower. And you know, we talk about the religious or spiritual rebirth of Russia, and it's interesting that the divorce rates actually went up since that time, not down, as it should have been expected during like a spiritual renaissance.
But it's also about the attitude, so the social attitude towards divorce as a phenomenon. Well, I cannot say that divorce is perceived in any way as something really, as a real tragedy. For example, so can you imagine a United States president divorcing his wife and then, well, having any chances to, well, have any further career? Can you imagine that? Because so, as far as I know, it would be a scandal.
Yeah.
And here, when President Putin divorced his wife, so most of the people just bought it.
Yeah.
So I didn't buy it, but they bought it, and they said, "Oh, he is such a macho, yeah."
He's a brave man. Yes.
A brave.
He wasn't afraid that the way public's opinion is going to change, and the interesting thing, it didn't change.
Actually, nothing. it was made, so it was designed in a very quiet manner, like, oh, we have no time to spend together,
Right.
it's so hard to take into consideration the peculiarities of my job, well, both KGB and being a president,
Yes.
probably, yeah. But nothing changed, and so his rates, so his rating,
Public rating,
actually increased, and that's just one point. Though I should admit here that there are some steps that the Russian government takes towards the strength, so the maintenance of family here. For example, this thing called like the mother's capital or maternal capital, as translated sometimes. So a kind of amount of money, probably 500,000, or like approximately 500,000 of rubles, which government, well, conditionally, so
may give.
Yes, to a woman having a child. So the money which can be spent on like improvement of real estate situation or education or like
and also supposays they help like single mothers.
yes, and they actually help single mothers. But the fact is, so the statistics still says that there are a lot of single parents, and it is not perceived as something bad. Most of the single parents, so they have one child. So the statistics also shows that those families who have more children in Russia, more than 2 children in Russia, are less likely to divorce. But, well, many families just stop having one child and they divorce not in 3 years, but after living from 5 to 9 years together. And so why are they still having just one child? So, because partially Russia stays a real abortion champion in Europe. It is the first country, probably, like I said,
as far as we know.
Ukraine probably will be a little bit higher in these terms. But Russia is the abortion champion.
Well, USSR was the abortion champion.
It was
so
the
now
first country to legalize such a thing.
And actually helped and mandated it. Not mandated it, but it was kind of easy to get an abortion. Like my parents told me, stories or instances. It was frowned upon because the society, though it was communist, the communist government really was a conservative one. In a broad sense.
In a broad sense.
Yeah, so there was or not the government, the society, rather. So the society frowned upon, a divorce. It frowned upon, babies out of wedlock. The abortion was not considered like a great thing, but it was widely available, and a woman could easily go to a clinic and get an abortion, and
it was paid by the government.
Yes, exactly. So, and at that time, so as anything that government pays by, all that money doesn't come, the government doesn't produce money.
It takes it from us.
Right, so, because it's like in America there's Federal Reserve, they can print money, but in Soviet Union it wasn't that much the case. So basically the society sponsored, you could say, abortions. And we continue to do so through taxation. At least some of our taxes go to funding abortion clinics, paying for doctors who...
Actually, abortion clinics are not separated from the general women health care system in Russia. So we pay for the women's care system itself, which, includes such an operation, and that's really bad. But the stuff is... So some may say, it is because of hard hard situation and economy of this country. So this being so traumatized by the Soviet experience and the revolutions and the wars and the repressions and all that stuff. So, but actually, if we speak of New Russia as being the torch of values, of traditional values, of family, it's kind of complicated because, we'll take the Russian Orthodox Church as the organization really influencing the political and social life here in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And first, this church allows divorces. Divorces completely okay. So it is said though, well, it's not so much okay, but actually they have 11 reasons.
Yes, at least the Russian Orthodox Church.
Yeah,
does.
the Russian Orthodox Church has 11 reasons, or 11
reasons, I guess.
To approve a divorce, including the one which is so not only adultery, but including the one which is just two people go to the state body, state service,
Yes.
and they divorce here.
Mm-hmm.
So from the point of view of state, and they take this document to the priest.
Yes. And not only that, also marriage works that way a lot of
times.
And
it is done.
I've heard people tell me priests, supposedly not like liberal priests, like a regular
Orthodox priest.
Yeah, with long beards and long hair, all the stuff that you're thinking of. They would approve people getting married in a marriage, government kind of approved marriage, and they would say, well, just live together. And if later you feel like being married in church, you can also do that, but it's not like 100% requirement.
Like have a try. Really, they say have a try. Well, not all of them, but actually it is embodied in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
Well, our parents' generation can give an advice to the youngsters.
Yeah.
Well, have a try, live together, and if you suit well, then probably you should go to have it state recorded first, and then you go to have it church recorded. But so the very notion of a marriage being unbreakable, is it's completely odd to this culture. And we feel it here because lots of people are like converting to Catholicism from Russian Orthodoxy and having in their mind so that Orthodox religion, Orthodox Church is very conservative, and they come and those Latins, those Catholics are so liberal, so they have this agenda, oversimplified ideas in their heads, and they come to the real Catholic Church and to realize that probably our long beard conservative style is a little bit too liberal in terms of morality. And that's the point. First, divorce allowed. Second, contraception allowed.
Yes.
Well, the only thing that is not allowed is abortion.
Well, and also interesting point about that it's only relatively recently, when Orthodox Church in Russia had somewhat a definitive, let's say, position on it. Even though it's interesting, and that's another topic of the way Russian Orthodox Church makes certain decisions which are then not enforced in parishes. Take, for example, the way they receive Catholics into the Orthodox Church. So, officially, they don't baptize Catholics. Catholic baptism is accepted. However, in many parishes, certain conservative priests, the same that accept people's divorces, will rebaptize Catholics or Lutherans or whoever. And I would say same thing goes for many other things. So even though abortion, there is a Russian Orthodox Church did speak out against abortion, there are a lot of theologians and priests who do not, let's say, agree to a full extent with this decision. For example, there is a famous anti-modernist journal, Orthodox journal in Russia called Благодатный огонь,
the Blessed Fire.
The Blessed Fire.
Gracious Fire.
Well, the one that comes down and supposedly comes down in Jerusalem for Easter. There is an author there who actually wrote in defense, let's say not in defense of abortion, but he did write that church fathers differ on this, and pretty much we can accept the the standard medical practice, which considers a baby becoming a baby only at a certain time.
3 months,
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and before that, there is no consensus. So technically,
So possibly in this vague water, yes?
yes. And not to go into theology too much, but also the way theology in the Orthodox Church works, and specifically in the Russian Orthodox Church, is that the ecclesiastical figures certainly do have power and certainly do have authority. However, when a traditionalist, quote unquote traditionalist faithful, perceives the church authorities going against the fathers, going against the consensus of fathers, they will surely, go with or their interpretation of fathers, not with what the patriarch or the synod mandated.
This is the core of the identity.
Mm-hmm.
They think that, well, Pope went once against this deposit fideum,
Yeah.
and we, the people, are to decide what it is first,
Yeah.
to recognize what is this consensus,
Mm-hmm.
what it is about, and to defend it, and no authority, or no final authority
Mm-hmm.
can have us do something, do the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And concerning the family, so the same stuff works. Some theologians, wearing these beards and speaking against, standing up against Catholics, Lutherans, the West, America, and also on. So we are the Holy Russia to defend truth and goodness in this world. And then they promote, in the moral sense, so in the moral dimension, they promote the agenda completely,
Alien, opposite to
alien and opposite. And we can say so ultra-liberal,
Mm-hmm.
and something that they consider as a norm or a variation in the modernist Catholic Church is considered to be a modernism, actually. And when I try to speak, when I try to discuss such issues with my Orthodox counterparts of my age and the people I work with, and like my friends, lots of them are young Orthodox gentlemen and ladies, and they, that's interesting. It's kind of schizophrenia, because in terms of dogma, theology, they stand, or like their agenda is like, you are heretics, modernists, and we are traditionalists. But when it comes to moral issues such as divorce, remarriage, contraception, I cannot.
I would say fundamental moral issues.
Fundamental moral issues. Well, then if I take their texts and their way of speculating on these topics, and the usual LGBTQRSTUVW crowd way of speculating on the same issues, but having no names, no labels, I would be hardly able to understand what is whose.
Yes, I guess a lot of Orthodox have a hard time kind of choosing between, although liturgy and those things, outward things, are definitely important and definitely worth preserving, and we should fight to preserve them. However, there is I would say a hierarchy, though being important, there is
hierarchy of values.
Yes, hierarchy of values. So it's interesting that the same people who would argue for, let's say you have to speak Church Slavonic in the church, use Church Slavonic in the church, you can't shorten the fasts, any experiments with reforming the liturgy. And we're not talking about Vatican II kind of reforms. Very, from that perspective,
slight reforms.
Yes, very mild reforms. People really aggressively speak out against it, but the same priests or people say almost nothing about it, and they accept it by just saying, well, life is too difficult. So the same people, the Orthodox Church has this, well, not actually Orthodox Church, I would say the Catholic Church in a big sense, before the schism, had the idea of economia, which is basically softening some of the rules, as if my memory serves me right, Theodore the Studite said that economia, it's softening rules in order to preserve the law, to the New Testament law. And he surely did not mean
compromising.
Yes, and he did. Yes, and he did not mean how many hours you fast or how many days you fast, or all that stuff. He surely meant fundamental moral issues, but and I think he also said that economia doesn't allow for lawlessness, right? So this is exactly what happens, because the real argument here usually it's economia, right? So it's kind of similar, and I'm sure that's where they got it from, or certain cardinals in Germany say exactly the same thing. They don't have the terminology to kind of define it in terms of church tradition, but the Orthodox Church do. So they take this concept and they use it in order to just basically approve of anything liberal. And also, in talking with our Orthodox friends, even going away from the moral issues, let's say dogmatic issues, oftentimes you argue with them, and then what they will say is, well, why did you dogmatize that opinion? They of course argue against it, but then they said, well, I guess you can have that opinion, but why did you dogmatize it?
So why should you impose it on me?
Right. So, and not going to that specifically, but it's a very, let's call it, for lack of a better word, liberal logic.
It's one piece of this liberal, landscape.
Yeah,
yes.
landscape.
Well, another was quite a bit time ago.
Mm-hmm.
Patriarch Bartholomew
Mm-hmm.
allowed remarriage for priests, divorced priests actually, and the widows.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I had a talk with my Orthodox counterparties, who said, well, in theory, so after I explained all the kind of biblical perspective of divorce and remarriage, and the church father stuff again, and some just abstract, how to say, and some abstract principles just of this ethics, they would say, yes, in theory it's kind of reasonable, but you need to you need to have some compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Life is hard. Why can't you be just a little bit kinder to people involved in such situations? And you know what I remember?
Mm-hmm.
Well, any talk of Jordan Peterson with any liberal guy.
Sure.
So in a Canadian TV,
Mm-hmm.
it's the same talk. So and then he said to me, one guy, only those involved in this problem can actually dare discussing it,
Mm-hmm.
can actually discuss and make any decision concerning this issue.
Mm-hmm.
So it means that in their perspective it's a relative truth.
Mm-hmm.
So though it is not kind of fixed in the teaching of the Orthodox Church, for the fact that there is no one body Orthodox Church and its teaching, but the mainstream way of reasoning is this big.
Yeah.
And this liberal.
Well, and they don't say, and funny enough, they don't say to priests, well, what do you know, you're a priest? I mean, the faithful Orthodox. But they can't say, well, what do you know if you haven't experienced this?
Yeah, actually.
Yeah.
Probably it's kind of influence of our Marxist past, because it's so collectivist in its nature, this kind of reasoning. So, you, the bourgeoisie, cannot impose your ideas on us, the working class. And here, so we have no working class here because we have our industry collapsed, but that's another issue. And so we still divide the society into groups, and the group identity comes first. That's a real problem because the Orthodox society, like the body of the believers, is divided into groups, each of them considering themselves to be the true Orthodox, like the true Orthodox crowd. So both conservative and liberals, those thinking that Catholic Church is actually nothing wrong with it, and we can like commune. To those absolutely protesting against it. Those actually having Protestant vision of the Holy Eucharist, and those having almost Catholic vision of the Holy Eucharist, like all under the same body, because the main organizing principle of it is one nation, one church. So it's kind of embodied in the way the churches are derived from each other. And are progressing.
Yes, so and it's
as far as the church is not separated, is not kind of taken away from the nation in terms of teaching authority. It's not above, but it's incorporated. It has no moral right to teach, and actually the civil Russians or the non-believers or skeptics.
Which, by the way, there are quite a few.
Quite a few. They will say, well, what can this church tell us? And that's the problem, because the good part of the moral part of the moral voice of within the Russian Orthodox Church cannot give an idea, so cannot promote any idea and show it to the civil society, because civil society is first not developed much yet, and then very resentful and aggressive towards the ecclesiastical matters, probably for the Soviet background, and for the way the Russian Orthodox Church authority, the Patriarch and the Synod, cooperates with the government.
And it's interesting that the secular resentment of the church is often the same as in any country. Why do they teach us morals when they are themselves immoral? And we're not going to go into the issue of who is doing what, and our Catholic Church is going through this tribulation now also, although for the most part, of course, not in this part of the world, but they do, they speak out against this. And the interesting thing about it is that Orthodox Church does not, and often doesn't have as we discuss the issues of marriage, contraception, abortion, they don't have a strong, stance on it. Although the Russian Orthodox Church also tried to develop even the social doctrine, but I don't think it was, widely popular or, implemented. So a lot of people have this moral resentment, and it reminds me of the words from the book of the Apostle, that about those who love the world. And I think the Orthodox Church a lot of the times actually, in areas where they shouldn't, they actually give themselves to this worldliness, and the whole anti-ecumenist discourse.
Catholic?
Yeah, well, what I mean is, let's say, take anti-ecumenists for instance, right? What do they talk about when they, defend the Orthodox faith against Catholics? Of course, they mention, all the false teachings that we have, supposedly, like the filioque, for example. But the funny thing is, none of them know about it, usually. Right? And but it's never about even the issues that are more practical, I guess.
Really hot and divisive.
Yeah.
Because actually, all the theological talks, first, most of the people engaged into this kind of discussion in Russian sector of the internet, while in Russian journals, theological journals, and even the civil discussion, they do not know what they're talking about.
Right.
And they never cover the very hot issues that everybody knows, that everybody feels are very relevant in our country. For we are dying.
Right.
Actually, we are dying, and our families collapse.
Right. Because the fundamental issues, as you know, St. John Paul taught, in all of those things that our country allows, and the Orthodox Church does not speak out against them. At least they don't speak out against them enough with enough force, because they do not want to conflict with the government. And it's true, sure, as we mentioned, yes, the Church does have some influence on the way our politics are conducted, but where they can really influence practical matters, they say nothing. They usually support any programs that our government puts forth, and at least in my opinion, they do not tackle these issues at all. I mean, abortion and contraception. So of course this happens, and unfortunately, a lot of the perception is from Russians who see Catholicism, and I guess it's true in many parts of of the world about the Catholic Church, but certainly not about Russia. I mean, we do have some, liturgical abuses, but very mild ones. They wouldn't even be considered, I think, liturgical abuses in some other places. So the church in Russia, it's the Catholic Church in Russia, the overall position is very, I would say conservative. But Russians don't see it that way, because the Orthodox Church or the propaganda on TV bombarded them with the fact that we're liberals. They come to church thinking they will marry gays, they will, all kinds of liberal stuff. And then they discover that no, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do like something else, with all those hard practical issues.
And then they got frustrated and they leave. Actually, lots of homosexuals coming, really, I was a witness of homosexuals coming to the Catholic Church and actually planning, acting as if, now we are expecting to marry us. Why don't you marry us? And they found out all the peculiarities, and so that was a kind of frustration.
Yes.
But actually, concerning the issue of homosexuality, in Russia, it's it's really tough. So the liberal crowd in the European countries would say that Russia is like the citadel of homophobia, like the fortress of gay hatred, or hatred against gays. But actually we cannot, the fact that we cannot know it exactly, because there is no actual social discussion of such an issue. First, what I can say from my observations is that our society is probably even more homosexualized than any other, than a Polish society or society of Poland or Germany, or as far as I can state, or as far as I know, the United States, because we use, if we take the Russian political discourse, like rural political discourse going on in our, in flats, in just person-to-person talks, lots of metaphors of political and social relations are based on homosexual act. Actually, homosexual rape. It's not a good thing, to think of political and social relations in terms of brutally raping some other males. So actually it's very biologically based, and it's very animal, because in the animal world we have those acts performed to express
violence, basically.
Violence and dominance. It's the way of expressing dominance. And our homophobia, so I mean the traditional homophobia, is that we actually detest the passive party. I'm sorry for such language, but I don't know, I'm really confused, because we here have no experience of discussing it in a civil way.
Right.
So we detest, naturally, an average Russian detests the passive party because he is weak, because he is oppressed, because we actually have a fear of getting this position. And we are kind of blind, trying not to think of, moral state of the one taking advantage of this.
Well, to give a real example, Russia celebrates a lot the Victory Day, right, where the war for Russia stopped, right, and very heterosexual males would put stickers on their car where it depicts stickmen. One has basically hammer and sickle as the head, and the other one has the swastika on the head. Although probably now they won't, because Russia passed a law against the Nazi imagery, so they won't be able to do it legally.
They still do it.
Yeah, they still do it because it's not really that law.
It's not enforced actually.
That law is used for different reasons. Maybe we'll talk about it later. To get rid of.
Continue.
Yeah. So the two stickmans, basically, you can guess who's on top, who's on bottom.
Being at war.
Yeah, allegorically being at war, and under it says we can repeat this again. So basically, the point of we can do it again, and so the active party is glorified as like the warrior, the conqueror, the winner.
We are the winners.
Yes,
because we performed a homosexual act upon a rather forced one.
Yes.
Upon this poor Hitler.
And also, lastly, I think it should be mentioned just the type of conservatism that Russia has. The Catholic Church, I wouldn't even call it like a conservative tradition per se, because I would say it's based on theological points, theological beliefs, positions, and they have nothing to do with conserving anything per se. It's about keeping the natural order of things. And in Russia, it's not so. It's about tradition with a small t. And so right now, I guess same thing is happening in Russia as it did in Western countries in the 60s and around that time, with the emergence of the feminist rhetoric, the post-structuralist rhetoric, the neo-Marxist rhetoric, where small groups of intellectuals in certain universities or in certain departments would speak about certain issues which were considered very left-wing, and then they spread from there. So I think the same thing is happening in Russia.
Yes, exactly. As far as the universities are concerned, it all starts, as it has already started in the Western countries, from the universities, from the departments of linguistics, philology, cultural studies.
Yeah, anthropology, sociology, yes.
Because actually we read the books issued there.
And so we already, of course this is not the case in smaller cities, but in Moscow and St. Petersburg, we do see openly gay couples. And the conservatism that Russia has, I would say that's a very dangerous marriage, no pun intended, of populism and this type of conservatism, because we are conserving specific kind of moment in history, I would say, right? So Russia already seceded to some liberal ideas, and Putin repeats that he's not against a lot of the liberal positions. So where this will go, I think, in maybe far future, maybe not such a far future, it depends on a lot of things, but if the public opinion will shift to, let's say, a more, for lack of a better word, left-wing culturally, I mean, homosexuality, that kind of thing, our government will switch with it also, because the point, I think, more than preserving any cultural values is to keep people voting for them.
To keep it legitimate.
Yeah, to keep
it legitimate.
Yeah.
They have a real feeling that they must appeal to well, the mainstream
Yes.
values,
Mhm.
and the mainstream values completely uncontrollable out of any ecclesiastical control, and actually out of any governmental control, because the Russian people live in a separate world from the Russian government and unfortunately the Church of Russia. And even within this society there is a division between the older generations and the younger generations, who will completely agree to any gay stuff, quite okay, especially in capital cities like
Right.
Moscow and St. Petersburg. Well, it's okay, why not?
Or of course they would keep some conservative things like, all right, if it's their choice, just don't march on the streets.
Yeah.
But ultimately, who cares?
Ultimately, who cares? Because it's not about the morality. The morality itself is not an issue. The issue is social
Structures, yes.
Structures.
Don't disturb the peace. So if you do whatever you do, in your homes, that's fine. But just don't walk around, don't talk about it, don't scream about it.
And nobody goes about what it is, what it means in long term and even mid term.
Right, right. And where this is going is that slowly but surely it will be more and more acceptable to speak out against it. More people, younger generation, will be okay with it also. And the emergence of, like, even look at the modern liberal kind of way of thinking. It is quite conservative. Is that we established these principles, these rules, where, let's say, we cannot discuss the fact that the homosexual marriage in theological terms does not exist and can never exist. So I think it's quite conservative, just basically like that, right? And when Russia is far more conservative like that, just when the public opinion will change, it will conserve that, and it won't conserve like the Americans now are much worse, but I remember when I was living in Canada, I was still able to discuss certain issues, even though it was not kind of culturally accepted anymore, like speaking against gay marriage. But I wouldn't get kicked out of university back then. Now I guess with Jordan Peterson we discover it's quite different. But at least back then it was that, right? So I could discuss these issues. But if Russia has the same shift, our kind of conservative mentality will not allow for any discussion. So like the image will reverse.
Yes, because the criterion of good and truth is actually the nation, the nation opinion. So no objective truth, and that's the point. And probably that's the and we are just walking on the edge, the very extreme points still discussed. I'm not speaking about like just living together, concubinate, and all this divorce stuff, single parenthood, completely accepted, because nobody actually teaches young people, just young members of our society, to think so. What it will cost,
right?
In terms of economy, in terms of budget, it ruins your life. In terms of the psychological state of your children.
Right.
Nobody speaks of children. Nobody actually thinks of it.
And that's a whole different drum in Russia, the state of those things. But also.
And the conservative part, so the older generation, having no actual discussion, having no actual touch with the younger generation, lives in its own world where everything is under control. But people die and generations.
Right. And I think also younger people. If I was a young, let's say, person interested in becoming a practicing Christian, my question in practical again matters would be, well, if you allow for divorce and that's fine, and you don't make people go get married in church, if you accept kind of the in Russian terms civil, but I don't mean like just cohabiting, I mean going to the government and signing the piece of paper, that you're married. Why, what status does the secular government have? So why not just allowing, us, we love each other, why do we need the government? It has no theological status. It doesn't mean that they sign something and God accepts it, So it would be logical, slippery slope argument I think here works, that, they start from this and we'll go down the road there.
It's because the theological grounds, the theological explanation of marriage is not here.
Right.
It's not here because it's wishfully blind for the reasons we just discussed.
Yeah, and just Orthodox Church stays like they keep talking about the 7 ecumenical councils, and unfortunately that's where the whole kind of
development just
ended, right? So they're just unable. Yeah, they're unable to a wide extent discuss these issues, and of course we'll talk about it more
further, but probably we kind of succeeded to cover some stuff about the family values in Russia.
I guess it's the first episode, so probably.
Actually, I would also say so. The main part of media. So we all know about this liberal media in the Western cultures of the Western countries, in the USA and Canada, promoting liberal neo-Marxist agenda. But here in Russia, we have almost all the channels, all the TV channels run by the government or supported by the government and then influenced by the government directly. So, and we have, together with like low quality political discussions, political shows promoting this patriotic agenda and imperial agenda in political terms, we have lots of hyper-sexualized programs abusing sexuality in every manner possible. Actually, even
showing normativity of cohabiting, dating.
Cohabiting, dating, sex out of wedlock, single parenthood, and even gay stuff. So, for example, we have a series in our homophobic culture in the most popular entertaining channel named TNT, TNT. Yes, they showed us a Russian version of Clinica.
Yeah, I think the comedy.
Superman. Scrubs. The Russian version, the adaptation or theft, I don't know. Of this series, and they have a very pretty guy raised in very good doctor, very professional, raised in a family of 2 fathers, and so all the jokes, all the humor around this. Okay, they kind of making fun of him.
Yeah, it's a bit homophobic, of course,
but still it is there. And as far as we have no mechanisms to discuss and to reflect on what is going on, so no actual cultural studies, no social studies, properly conducted.
Right.
It all goes along. Oh well, probably it's okay. So and slips without any consideration.
Right. Well, maybe we'll also make separate episodes on Russian pop culture, just for you to see it's not any different. People watch and get the same ideas, and they're conservative only to a small extent. They're not willing to, let's say, speak publicly on certain issues, not because they don't believe in them or they don't think it's okay, just because they're afraid of getting their sponsorship cut, or people will not watch them as much. But it's just a slow process. People will slowly become they're becoming
accepting of this. Yeah. Well, what I mean is that it's not particularly easy to be a young Catholic in Russia, because you have your younger generation, the generation you belong to, and they will not accept even the terms you are speaking in, because what do you mean by objective truth? It's all prehistoric. It's so not European. It's so not American.
Or they will just use the orthodox thing. Life is too difficult, like
yes,
sure. But
so the civil part of it, and the orthodox part of it will say, well, life is too difficult, and we'll kind of have to cope with it. So, and you lack charity. Okay, then we go to the generation of our parents, and they will say, so you are traitors. You betrayed our great country with this great duhovnost. How would you put it in English? Duhovnost, spirituality. But
it's not quite spirituality. It's like, well, it is spirituality.
Heritage,
but it's like,
spiritual heritage. Yeah,
kind of,
like you betrayed our spiritual heritage, and you must be anathema. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so I guess this was maybe a little longer than we planned. So if you have any recommendations, by the way, as for the formats, as I said, like it's the first time. So if you have any suggestions, topics you want us to discuss, of course we'll have our own topics and we'll try to record it, to the best of our ability. But maybe if you have, questions, maybe we'll do like a Q&A one time. So if you have any questions, you can, post questions. Also, we're gonna have probably use some websites, so you can, if you want, you can send donations. Most of them will go either for our parish, our Byzantine Catholic parish. Certain things like, I don't know, maybe better equipment or whatnot, but mostly I would say books for our church. We're still quite a small chapel. We'll talk, maybe we'll film it maybe one time, and we'll show you around and talk about how even specifically our parish life is, so you can see for yourself. We're not quite sure how to do that, maybe through Patreon or not. If you have suggestions in that regard, also send us.
Please share these ideas with us, and yes, we'll appreciate any kind of feedback from you, and so see you around.
Glory to Jesus Christ.